I'm joined by Emily Schrader, a Middle East expert. And this is the thing, isn't it? I get the impression, Emily, it is not a question of if we have a big terror attack, because these are happening all the time. When you look at the atrocities going on in Germany, it was the anniversary of the Bataclan the other day. What's happened in Europe is we haven't got rid of people with these extremist views. If anything, we're importing even more. And it really hit hard when I found out that a lot of Israelis look at Europe and are deeply, deeply concerned about us.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, what we see going on in Europe is extremely concerning, and that there's a tolerance for intolerance. I mean, I think this is the best way to describe what's happening. And I've seen it every single time that I come to the UK or anywhere in Europe. I am more scared to be Jewish in the UK than I would be to be Jewish anywhere else, even places like Dubai, for crying out loud. In the Middle East, it's safer than it is in Europe. How can that be? And we see that time and time again with various incidents just in recent weeks. We had what happened in Birmingham. I was actually at the Aston Villa game. The fact that the police there, first of all, made up an entire excuse for banning the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, as we now know. There's an ongoing scandal about that. But furthermore, that they were allowing hundreds of anti-Israel protesters to gather outside as if Palestine was playing the game or something. Why were they even there? I mean, these aren't fans of Aston Villa. The fact that they allowed this in the first place is outrageous. And the signs, the anti-Semitic signs that we saw there, if you see a Zionist, call the anti-terror hotline, the demonization in order to distract from their own support for jihadist, genocidal ideology that seeks not just to destroy the state of Israel, but to destroy Europe as well, including here in the UK. And the fact that the government here and that people, even the general public, is so blissfully unaware of what's happening is really going to work to their detriment. And yes, as an Israeli, I'm extremely concerned for the future of Europe about this issue.
One thing that struck me when I was reading back the reports of the Bataclan, I actually watched a documentary a few years ago. I think it's on Netflix. One of the most harrowing things I've ever watched. And when you read about what they did, I mean, it's just terrifying. But what stood out were the majority of the assailants were born in Belgium or born in France. They weren't people who had turned up. They were born and bred in those countries with these extreme ideologies, who considered Parisians wicked, who therefore thought that actually the monstrous evil attacks were justified. So what can Europe do to tackle this? Because one thing that struck me again when I was in Israel is, if you put to one side the horrors of Hamas over in Gaza, there is a Muslim population in Israel who consider themselves Israeli, who are moderates, who are fully integrated into society. So what lessons is it that the United Kingdom especially needs to learn?
Well, I think first and foremost, there are extremists also in Israel, but it is a minority, even in the Arab community, and that's important to note. But here in the UK, I think that there's a problem with a lack of pride in your own country, this self-defeating attitude that there's something wrong with the West, and that's all we ever talk about. We never talk about what's right with the West. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, democracy. All of these things are values that we should be proudly advocating, and we're not. We focus exclusively on what's wrong with the West, and that gives rise and gives air to the subversion that's happening. And it's very much subversion. It's primarily coming from Qatar and from the Islamic Republic of Iran. Both sides, and both of them highly integrated here in the United Kingdom. It's become a money laundering playground for the Islamic Republic alone. I mean, Qatar, the royal family, owns more property here than the royal family here. This is insane. This is insane. Where is your self-preservation? Where is your pride as a country in the good things about the UK?
Other people might point out that Qatar has proven to be a very valuable ally to the West in certain circumstances. There are air bases in Qatar. In fact, American jets took off from Qatar to intercept missiles coming from Iran into Israel. Qatar gives us LNG every year so we can keep the lights on. So where is Qatar in all of this? Because very often the finger of blame seems to be pointed at them, and I don't always understand why.
I think it's because Qatar is both the arsonist and the firefighter. They've been playing both sides for a very long time. Strategically, of course, that's in their interest, but it certainly isn't in the West's interest. And if you look at how they've integrated themselves through their money, through their donations, even looking at the university issue, it's very problematic. In the United States, for example, they've donated over $6 billion in recent years to these universities, and we see the byproduct. I mean, those encampments that have taken place in the UK and the US and also Canada, claiming to be pro-Palestinian, which in fact are not. We see after the ceasefire, they're still protesting against Israel, because it's not about the Gaza war, and it's certainly not about what's good for Palestinians. It's about hating Jews. And that is the ideology that has been permeating these universities, and it's even worse here in the UK.
So how is this happening? I mean, we often talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, for example. Nigel Farage turned around and said he would prescribe the Muslim Brotherhood. I think it's been suggested by Theresa May in times prior. Why? What makes them so toxic?
Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is using their influence to put a pretty face on jihadist ideology. That has been their MO from day one. They've done it through not just the Muslim Brotherhood itself, which absolutely should be designated as a terror organization, both here and in the U.S., but also through all of their partner organizations, CARE, which we just saw designated as a transnational criminal organization and terror organization by the state of Texas. This is another branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, has a campus group, has been associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas itself is a wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the connections between the Muslim Brotherhood and these active terror groups that carry out these hideous attacks that we saw on October 7th, and of course that we've seen also in Europe, is very, very clear, and they're not even hiding it. The only time we hear them speak nicely about what's going on is when they're speaking to a Western-facing audience. We need to identify what this is, be able to call it out, and be able to take a stand unapologetically against it.
The difficulty is that I am terrified by Islamism. I'm terrified by the growth of Islamism in Europe. From accounts that I read, I am almost certain there will be a massive terror attack. Some analysts suggest that this could be something very similar to October the 7th, coordinated attacks, barbaric massacres, mass casualty events on the streets of various towns and cities across Europe. But the difficulty is, how can you weed out Muslims in a country who despise you and mean you harm without actually vilifying or persecuting those who absolutely do not, who are absolutely fine, who are part of our social fabric?
Well, I think that's a really, really great question, and brings up something that I wanted to mention just a second ago, and that is that the Arab states have taken a very strong stance against the Muslim Brotherhood. So why hasn't the West? The Muslim Brotherhood has been banned in Egypt. They've been banned in many of the Gulf states, obviously not Qatar. And there's a reason for that, because they know how dangerous this organization is, that it doesn't represent peace-loving Muslims who simply want to go about their lives practicing their religion, not bothering anyone else or trying to impose some sort of a perverted version of jihad. And that is exactly what the Muslim Brotherhood does want to do. So there is a difference. They are not pro-Muslim. This is something really important to understand about all of the issue with the Palestinians, but especially with the Muslim Brotherhood. This is not about Muslim rights or Muslim civil rights. They are an organization that is providing cover for terrorism that disproportionately impacts Muslims, especially in the Arab world. The biggest victims of terrorism are the people of the Middle East, the majority of whom are Muslims. And I think that people need to educate themselves about what's really happening on this front before it's too late.
Why do you think it is that Europe is failing to do this? Why is it that Europe has massively open borders, that we are taking people from regimes where we know terrorism is rife? There have been plenty of reports coming from Afghanistan that we have most certainly let people in from that country who at the very least are Al-Qaeda sympathizers. We know that the Taliban are selling letters where they're saying, oh, you know, dear Mohammed, we're going to come and murder you, love the Taliban, so they can present it to the authorities in the United Kingdom and say, right, you now have to give me asylum here. Why is it, do you think, because I cannot understand why a continent, and it's not just the UK, an entire continent seems to have this suicidal outlook to saying, well, we've got to help these people, we've got to bring them in, we can't do those checks, we're not going to prescribe the Muslim Brotherhood, when if it poses such a threat, and I sincerely believe, like you do, that it does, why are they gambling with this? I can't wrap my head around this.
Well, simply put, if I had to sum it up to one word, it would be subversion. And we've seen that nowhere more prominently than the issue between Israel and the Palestinians. The way that this war, this conflict has been presented, especially in the international media, is completely inaccurate to what's happening on the ground. I think a lot of Palestinians even would agree with that sentiment. What's happening in Gaza is not how it's being reported in the news, because they want to present a certain narrative. And that is, a lot of it is being spearheaded by Al Jazeera. Now, who runs Al Jazeera? the state of Qatar. That's state-run media. And they have been one of the chief sponsors of this laundered ideology and presenting it as something that, oh, the Palestinians are victims of everything that happened, even if the stories are completely fabricated in some cases. We know that Al Jazeera has completely falsified stories during this war about Gaza. And so when people push back against Islamism, they say it's a conspiracy, you're exaggerating, it's not really that bad, in order to distract the public from what's really happening. Because as a Western person, we don't want to believe that there's a conspiracy to undermine the West. It seems crazy, it seems extreme to say that, but the reality is that is exactly what they're doing. That is the fundamental ideology, both of Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Islamic Republic of Iran on the Shia Muslim side. This is something that we need to speak out against, to educate the general public about, and to not back down when people claim that it's a conspiracy, because the evidence is there. Despite the linguistic barrier in understanding it, the evidence is there, and it's unacceptable that we keep making excuses for it.
I mean, some might argue that the difficulty is that when it comes to what's going on in Gaza, the only people who seem to be in Gaza able to get the message out are journalists who are connected to Hamas or are living there anyway, because the international community was not allowed in, is still not allowed in. And so into that vacuum, you're going to have a load of conspiracy theorists. What is going on in Gaza?
Well, I've been in Gaza a couple of times to report. I actually went in with many of the international press. I was with France 24, I was with Iran International. So there have been limited permission to enter Gaza, and I do think that will be broadened very, very shortly. I actually have been against that from the beginning. I've said that I thought the international press should be allowed in from the beginning. However, that being said, there is a very legitimate concern in terms of the safety of international journalists. We know that previously one of the BBC journalists was kidnapped by Hamas and held hostage for some months. And this is something that we would expect Hamas to do in the future. That being said, I believe it's the responsibility and the risk of an international journalist to take that risk. So I hope that they do open that up, because I think that what's happening on the ground speaks to, quite frankly, what others would call the Israeli narrative of what's happening in the war in Gaza.
It's a problem not now, when journalists might finally be able to go into Gaza properly. What they're going to see is, a strip of land that is essentially rubberized, and that's not going to look good.
Yeah, but it's not just about what doesn't look good. Of course, this is the aftermath of a war. It's a war that we didn't want. It's a war that we didn't start. And when you're looking at urban warfare, this is the byproduct. It is a very unfortunate thing. That's why we don't want to fight wars. We didn't start it. But that being said, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be fighting the war, that we shouldn't be attempting to disarm Hamas and dismantle Hamas, because not only are they a threat to Israeli citizens, but they're also a threat to Palestinians. We saw what happened the second that Israel left certain areas of the Gaza Strip. They immediately started executing and torturing Palestinian civilians in the streets. And where was the international outrage? Where were the articles condemning Hamas in Al Jazeera, for example? Complete silence. The only people who spoke about this that I saw were the Israeli media.
Why is it, do you think, that the world has sort of turned its back on Israel? I mean, I don't consider myself as part of that world. I'm a huge supporter of Israel and have great sympathy for Israel. But in many respects, people can say that Israel's done a fantastic job fighting on 7 fronts. They seem to have basically, at least temporarily, completely prevented Hezbollah from functioning effectively in what was quite a sort of cunning and innovative fashion. They have, I suppose, regardless of the fallout, at least temporarily stymied the abilities of Hamas. They brought America and encouraged America to stand up against Iran, which was something that under Biden and before that Obama, America was reluctant to do. So materially, one could say Israel has actually dealt quite well with a lot of its problems. But the world now seems to despise Israel. A lot of people think Israel, frankly, are evil. What can be done about that?
Well, I think we need to continue to educate people about what really happened. It's an uphill battle, absolutely. And the primary reason for that, as I mentioned before, is subversion. A lot of the stories and accusations that have been lobbed against Israel just aren't accurate. They don't have a basis in reality. And I'll give you just one example. The claim of famine that people use, that people talked about during the Gaza war because aid was temporarily suspended in some places. First of all, what kind of country is responsible for providing aid for the entity, it's not a country, that invaded them? Only Israel is is held to those standards. No other country is held to those standards. But beyond that, aid actually was going through. There wasn't famine. And they changed the definition of famine in order to accuse Israel of famine. We saw similar things with various organizations about the term apartheid, about the term genocide. We saw different NGOs changing their definitions of what those terms actually mean in order to write reports and claim that Israel is committing such things. It's awful that there are innocent people who die in war, especially this most recent war. We have seen a lot of casualties, but the reality of the fact is that if you compare that to any other war, especially a modern war and especially an urban war, the civilian casualties are actually lower than any of the modern conflicts, and the total death count is in fact lower than many of the modern conflicts. So why? Ask yourselves, your viewers, ask yourselves, why is it that Israel is so disproportionately represented in the international media, in the conversation? Ask yourselves that.
Why is that, do you think? Because I do ask myself that.
At its core, it's anti-Semitism. And a lot of that is being fueled by the subversive efforts of groups like the Muslim Brotherhood. Al Jazeera has been one of the chief sponsors of these kinds of accusations against the state of Israel. And as an Israeli, I tell you, of course there are flaws of the state of Israel. Has everything that Israel or the IDF has done in this war, has it been legitimate? I don't know. That's something that needs to be investigated. Probably not, because it's a war and terrible things happen in war. But the idea that it's different than any other conflict we've had in recent years, or even ongoing, you want to talk about massacres. Look at what's happening in Sudan. Look at what's happening in Nigeria. Tens of thousands of Christians being slaughtered by Islamists, and hardly anyone is talking about this.
Yeah, I know, actually 300 kidnapped in northern Nigeria just today. Catholic school children, utterly vile. Listen, Emily, thank you ever so much. It's so brilliant to have you in the studio and so animated as well.